So, a couple weeks ago, I promised that I would release a video on how to install Linux using Virtualbox. Unfortunately, I ran across some hardware difficulties. Video was laggy, audio was choppy, and essentially everything that could go wrong did. So, I had to order a piece of hardware from Amazon, namely a video capture card, and fortunately, it made its way in earlier this morning. So, I apologize for the wait, folks, but we're going to finally do that installation here and now. My name is Michael, and you're watching The Linux Lifestyle. So, I'm on the Ubuntu website where we're going to be downloading the image file that's going to be used to install our virtual machine. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the host system that we're going to use. The host PC that we're going to use is a 2014 MacBook Pro with a quad-core i5 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, and about 256 gig of SSD storage space. The system requirements for Ubuntu 20.04.1 is 2 gigahertz dual core processor or better. So we've got our processor covered. We also need 4 gigabyte of system memory, and since we already have 8 gigs of system RAM, that's going to be easy as well. Additionally, we're going to need to reserve 25 gigabytes of operating system storage space for our virtual machine. So basically, we've got everything covered that we need. Additionally, we need internet access, which is pretty much a no-brainer right there. And we're going to need either a DVD drive or USB port for the installer media. Actually, since we're running a virtual machine, we really don't need this. We're going to be doing the installation directly from the image file that we're going to download. So, if you've not downloaded the ISO file already, I'm going to, basically give you a little bit of time. We're going to pause the video, and once the ISO is downloaded, we're going to continue on to our next step. So, did you download the operating system file from the Ubuntu website yet? Excellent. Okay, right now we're on my Mac desktop, and I have VirtualBox running. Now, VirtualBox is a very popular piece of virtualization software. It's available on Linux, it's available on Mac, it's available on Windows. And we're going to use this to create our virtual machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is click New. And we're presented with the option here to name our machine. Now, literally, we can name it anything we want, but this time out, I'm going to name it after the operating system it runs. So it's going to be Ubuntu 20.04.01. And you're going to notice down here that when I entered in the name, VirtualBox was smart enough to basically fill in the other fields here. So it knows that it's going to be a Linux machine, and we know that it's going to be running Ubuntu 64-bit. The next thing we need to look at is the memory size. Now, if you remember from the Ubuntu website, the system requirements said 4 gigs of RAM, so that's what we're going to enter here. 4 gigs of RAM is equal to 4,096 megabytes. So let's continue. And next we're going to create our virtual hard disk, which is going to be a file. And the file type is going to be VirtualBox Disk Image or VDI. And we're going to go for dynamic allocation. Now this means that the VDI file that we're about to create is going to start out as small as possible. But as we install the OS, apply updates, install packages, etc., the size of that file will expand until it reaches a maximum size of 25 gigabytes, which is what we're going to enter over here. Finally, we're going to hit the create button, and right now we have our virtual machine. Let's start it up and see what it gives us right now. I'm hitting start, and as you can see, we don't have all that much. You see, the thing is this: although we've created the machine, okay, Virtualbox does not automatically install the operating system, so I'm going to go in the folder and find that image file I downloaded earlier, okay, and I'm hitting add, and we're going to look for our Ubuntu 2004 AMD 64, and this is the one we're going to open up, and we are now ready. I am choosing it, and I am starting it. Now, be advised that right now we are running a virtual machine. We are running a virtual machine in live disk mode, as a result of which things are going to move a little bit slower than expected. Okay, right now the live disk is checking the other mounted hard drives for errors to make sure that everything's okay, and that is almost done. And now, as I was saying, we're running a live disk environment inside a virtual machine. This means it's going to be a little bit slower than it would be if it was a normal bare metal hardware test. So in some cases I will be pausing the video, and in other cases I'll be speeding it up. That way we don't, waste your time. But right now we are waiting for the main menu to kick in, and that should be in any second now. And waiting. And here we go. Now, you're going to see two options here. One is try Ubuntu and install Ubuntu. Now, if I was installing this on a regular machine, not a virtual one, I would want to try this out. I would want to make sure that basically all my hardware, my video, my audio, my mouse, my keyboard, all worked under Linux. I would try to go online. I would just try to make sure that everything was okay. But this is a virtual machine. I already know everything's going to be alright. So I'm just going to go straight to the installation. The first screen we have involves the keyboard layout, which is going to be English US. So I'm going to continue here. And we're going to go for a minimal installation. The reason I'm going with the minimal install is I really want this installation to go quickly as possible. So all I really want installed outside of the operating system is a web browser and some basic utilities. Now let's look at the other options. Download updates while installing Ubuntu. Usually I uncheck this. I've had some terrible luck whenever I try to install updates during an installation, so I'm just going to leave this unchecked. Install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware. I'm not going to do that either during the install. We're going to be doing something afterwards. We're actually going to be installing the drivers and everything else once the operating system is installed. That's going to be our last step. So I'm going to hit continue. And I'm going to wait. And I can either erase the disk and install Ubuntu or do something else. I'm just going to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. If you look at the advanced features, we can do things like encrypt the disk or use an alternative file system like ZFS, which would allow us to take snapshots of our operating system in various states. That comes in handy if you mess up your OS and need to go back. But since this is a virtual machine, I'll be able to take the snapshots using VirtualBox, so that'd be kind of redundant. So I don't need the advanced features. I don't need something else. I'm just going to hit install now. And this is the "Are you sure you really want to do this" box, which I'm going to hit continue. And the time zone is Chicago, which is correct, so I'm going to hit continue again. And I'm going to add in some user information, namely my name and my password. And finally, I'm going to hit continue. And this is going to start our installation. Now, usually this process takes about 15 to 25 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and when I come back, we're going to do some post-install work, and then we're going to call it a day. So our Linux installation is now finished. Next time that we boot into this machine, we'll no longer be working in a live disk environment. We'll actually be working within a full Linux installation. With that being said, we still have a couple of things that we've got to do. First off, we got to apply updates to this machine. Secondly, we've got to install the VirtualBox guest editions, which will provide us some additional display and mouse drivers, along with some other niceties, which is going to make running a virtual machine a lot easier. Finally, we're going to clone this machine. The reason we're going to clone this machine is that I have some additional tutorials planned for it. And I find it's a lot easier if I just clone this machine from the main VirtualBox UI than going through an installation process every time I need to show somebody something new. So let's get started with this. First, I'm going to click the restart button. And you're going to see a little message in a little bit that says, "Please remove the installation medium," then press enter. Essentially, we are unmounting the ISO image that we downloaded earlier, so we can just simply boot into our live environment. So I'm going to hit enter now, and we're going to let VirtualBox reboot. And now you notice that we have a login prompt. So I'm going to click on my name here and type in the password I gave earlier. And we will have an Ubuntu desktop momentarily. Now, since this is our first run of our operating system, it's going to ask us for some information for onboarding purposes, namely online accounts, if we want to connect them, which I'm going to skip. I'm also going to skip the live patch service, and since this is a virtual machine, I really don't feel much of an urge to send Canonical some user information, so I'm going to hit no here. And I don't need location services either, so okay, we're done with the onboarding for now. I am going to go into our applications menu, which is located in the bottom left hand corner of the screen, and I'm going to type into this text field update. And here we have our software updater, and that should be booting up and checking the repositories for any updates that the system may need. Now, if you notice down here, we have about 295 megabytes worth of downloads that are ultimately going to constitute our updates. So this is going to take a while. So once again, I'm going to click the install, and while the updates are being applied, I'm once again going to pause the video. I expect this to take another 10 to 15 minutes, and when we return, we'll move on to our next step. Okay, so the updates are now finished, so let's restart the machine and move on to our next task. And we're going to log back in. And now we're going to add the Virtualbox guest additions. Now, as I mentioned before, the guest additions are basically a collection of device drivers, kernel modules, and other little things that will basically make this virtual machine a little more usable. But in order for those to work, we're going to need to download some additional software from the Ubuntu repositories. So let me start by firing up a terminal real quick here. And I'm going to bring up the font a little bit so it's a little more readable. And there's a few packages that we're going to need to install from the repository. And I'm going to basically do this from the command line. And so first let me enter the command, and then I'll explain to you exactly what it is and what it does. Okay, so this is our command: sudo apt install build essential dkms linux headers dash $, and within parentheses uname_r. So the first part is sudo. Sudo is basically what we use to tell Ubuntu that the command that we're about to execute is going to be, executed as an administrator. So this is then administrator or root privileges that's basically telling the command line what to do. Now, apt is a command line package manager. Now, if you remember the first lecture about Linux, we discussed package managers and repositories. So, apt is a command line package manager which is responsible for the installation, updating, and removal of Linux packages that we get from the repository. We want the package manager to install in this specific case, and we're going to be installing 3 packages. The first is Build Essential. Build Essential is a meta package that includes the C++ compiler along with some commonly used libraries in the C++ language. The next package is DKMS, which is a series of Linux modules that we'll also find useful. And the last one is Linux headers with a dash, $, and uname_r. So, from the $, and inside the parentheses is a variable in bash. And inside of the variable, we are basically using another tool called uname and r, which will basically give us the kernel release number. So the last one, Linux headers, we want the Linux headers of the current Linux kernel that's installed. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to enter the password that I originally declared when I first installed the OS. And it says here that we're going to be taking up about 143 megabytes of additional disk space. So I'm going to hit yes, and we're going to let that go. Now, as a side note, a lot of tutorials you see in Linux will say apt.get. That's another package manager that's available for Ubuntu. The reason I use apt is this. If you look down here, we have this nifty little status bar that tells us how far into the process we're getting. Right now, we're almost done. We're just waiting for a couple of last things to do, and that's excellent. So we got our package repositories that are going to be essential in installing the guest editions. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go up to the Virtualbox menu here, and I'm going to go into devices, and I'm going to hit insert guest edition, see the image, and this is going to give us the ISO file for the Virtualbox guest editions. And I am going to hit run, and from there, it requires my authentication. I'm hitting return, and that's going to take about a minute or two. And the additions have been installed, so I can hit return, which will close out the window. I also close out this command line tool, and I am going to restart this machine one last time. So let's do that. And I'm going to log in again. And it looks like we got it, but let's test it out. Now, up until recently, we've been doing all of our work in like a windowed screen. Wouldn't it be nice if we can make believe that basically we're running an actual full Ubuntu desktop? Well, I'm going to change the view to full screen. And on the Mac, that's the left command key and F. And look at that. We now have a full Ubuntu desktop. Okay, we got our app menu here. That's looking pretty. We got Firefox on 4 gigs of RAM, but that's working. We got our file manager. And you notice that if I go a little bit too close to the top, you're going to see the actual app menu for VirtualBox. That's the only thing that's really giving it away right now, but for the most part, we're working on a full Linux desktop environment now. And we're going to close this out. And there we go there. And basically, we're ready. Our virtual machine is good to go. There's only one more thing that I'm going to want to do before we call it a night, and that's make a clone of the operating system. See, I'm going to be doing multiple tutorials using this virtual machine, and I don't want to have to reinstall the OS every time I do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy. So I'm hitting clone, and okay, we're going to use Ubuntu 2004.1 clone as our virtual machine. And it says, please choose the type of clone you wish to create. If you choose full clone, an exact copy, including all the virtual hard disk files of the original machine, will be created. If you choose a linked clone, a new machine will be created, but the virtual hard disk files will be tied to the virtual hard disk files of the original machine, and you'll not be able to move the new virtual machine to a different computer without moving the original as well. So, I'm going to do a full clone, okay? So we're going to do that, and we're going to sit back and we're going to wait for this to finish. If you are new to the world of Linux and open source software, running a Linux distribution from within the confines of a virtual machine is a great first step. It allows you to test the limits of the operating system without putting your own production PC or your workflow in jeopardy. However, there are better ways to run Linux. The best possible way to run a Linux distribution is on a hard disk within a PC. This could be as a standalone operating system or in a dual boot configuration where either Linux or another operating system is selected at boot time. In a future screencast of the Linux lifestyle, we will be exploring how to set up a dual boot configuration using Windows 10 and the latest long-term service release of Ubuntu. But for now, this is all the time we have. My name is Michael Kornblum. You are watching the Linux Lifestyle, and we are reminding you to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, be good to yourself, and be awesome to one another. Have a great night.